Hey everybody, this is Keith with the Anxious Mammal. I appreciate you joining me. If this is your first time, welcome. If you were watching the beginning of the series, I think we are on our third presentation. So today we're going to look at childhood trauma and how this can impact the individual across their lifespan as they move into adulthood. So some of the symptoms that we want to identify as part of childhood adversity, there is actually a measurement, and there was a study done in the 90s with Kaiser Permanente, which is throughout California. It's a healthcare system for those of you who are not in California. They did a study on childhood trauma and adversity, looking at some of the clients that they had coming into the hospital and trying to identify how specific experiences these children um, have turned into precursors or predictions for possible issues down the line when they grow it through adolescence into adulthood, etc. So they found that people who had certain adverse experiences as children significantly increased their risk for the leading causes of death in the US, which are like heart disease, things like that. Um, there was also changes to how the brain would grow and function and develop, changes in the ability of the immune system to heal the body, changes in hormone regulation, and it could even cause changes down to the level of DNA, which is pretty significant because DNA is, known as basically the code of who you are. So those who had really high adverse experiences or really high doses of trauma and stress, they had 3 times or more chance of developing heart disease and lung cancer, and they were expected to live on average 20 years less than those who did not experience high levels of adversity and trauma. So probably a good idea to understand what childhood adversity actually is. And so we're looking at physical, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, parental mental illness. So even if the parents are dealing with mental illness, PTSD, substance use and substance dependence for the child or the family, domestic violence in the home, even parental separation. So if they're going through, their mom and dad are getting a divorce, or if one of the parents are in jail, then they don't have access to that parent. Those are all markers for childhood adversity. So in order to be aware of how childhood adversity impacts into adulthood, we use something called ACEs, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. ACEs aware just means that you have looked into this, and there is a training for this too as well. It's a self-administered questionnaire, 10 questions. It's for people who are 18 years and up because we want them to be adults and identify, did you experience these things as a child, yes or no? 10 questions, as I said, yes or no only, and every yes is worth a point, so a max of 10 points. And the more points the individual scores, the higher their increased chance of various issues later into life. The ACEs Aware training is free. It's something that you can access. It is useful because it helps you understand not only the ACEs questionnaire, but it helps you understand what these childhood experiences are, exactly how they can impact the person later in life, the statistics, etc. This is something that therapists, doctors, mental health should all have, and it's actually beginning to be mandatory in order for practitioners to bill insurance for different kinds of interventions and therapy approaches. So this is something that I've completed because I need to and because I want to, because I want to, you should always continue to remain aware of where we're heading in the trauma field, especially if you're someone who, identifies yourself as a trauma professional. You can access the information, the questionnaire, the ACEs Aware training at www.acesaware.org. And there's a lot of information on there about the study with Kaiser Permanente, as well as a TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke. That's very informative and kind of gives you a very good overview of this. So when we look at childhood experiences and we look later in life, we have something called the attachment theory. So basically, we can look at what the child experienced when they were younger, and we can identify how they're likely to attach to others in adulthood or how they're likely to behave within interpersonal relationships. So Those early attachments with your parents or caregivers, they are what teach you and shape you and basically inform your brain and how to interact with others, what to expect, what is acceptable and unacceptable. So this can be distorted based off of the experience, or it can be healthy based off of the experience. So what we're aiming for is secure. But there's three other kinds. So secure means that the caregivers, the parents, the guardians were sensitive, they were responsive, they were consistent. You knew how they were going to act. If they were upset, you knew what they were going to do. If they were happy, you knew what they were going to do. If you did something good, you knew what they were going to do. If you did something bad, you kind of knew what they were going to do. In a general sense, they were not unpredictable. This helps the child to feel very safe, secure, grounded. And so they're able to go and explore the world because they have a sense of safety, knowing that mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, whoever the guardians are there at the house to protect them and help them understand the world when they return. The child then develops this belief that their trusts, uh, they can trust others and that their needs will be met when they move into relationships in the future. Ambivalent is something that happens when you have inconsistent caregivers who are not predictable in the way that they're going to respond. Sometimes you may do something and your mother may be very proud of you and praise you. Other times it's like she may not even acknowledge. And it doesn't mean that the parent is necessarily bad. If you have a parent who is gone all the time because they're in the military, serving their country, or you have a mom who's gone all the time because she's in jail or has a substance problem, the mom's gone either way, and so the child has no access. So obviously, if you have a mother who's struggling with issues, that's going to cause another layer of issues for the child. But the mom not being available is the point here. That is the issue for the child. So when the parents are inconsistent, sometimes they might be aggressive, sometimes not, sometimes they're praising, sometimes ignore. This is very unpredictable. The child never knows what to expect. The world just seems chaotic. The child becomes very anxious because everything is so unknown. They become very insecure because they don't know how to respond in a lot of situations because they're never prepared because they never know what to expect. And then this fear and threat obviously leads to feelings of anger, which can result in behavior problems as a child. But later in life, they, as an adult, they start to feel like their needs won't be met, and that they might have to take care of those themselves. So they have a hard time really opening up and trusting others when they develop interpersonal relationships. Avoidant is the third type. This is when the caregivers are very distant, they're not around, they're not available. Mom works the night shift as a nurse, dad works the day shift at the factory. Mom's not available because she's using substances, dad's not available because he's in jail, or dad left, or mom died. Again, it doesn't matter, but there's other layers if the parents are present, but specifically distant and disengaged. The child is afraid to explore. They don't feel safe at their ground point at their home, so they're afraid to leave that point because they don't understand what the world will be like. They haven't had a lot of interaction or training or support, and they're very emotionally closed off, emotionally distant because emotions are not something that are taught in the household with people who are distant and disengaged. So the childhood starts to believe that their needs will not be met. And this is going to be something that later in adulthood, when they get in relationships, is going to make them feel insecure. It's going to make them maybe difficult to trust someone, difficult to open up because they don't feel like the person can help them anyway. So they may become apathetic. Finally is disorganized, which some may argue is the most difficult type to deal with as an adult. This is often the case with children who are in foster care or go through various homes because they deal with multiple caregivers who have various different styles of interaction, intervention, punishment, or anything like that. And so they have some that may be loving, some that may be extreme, some frightening, some disengaged, some passive. This causes the child to have a lot of emotional dysregulation, depression, anxiety, which results in anger. Their emotions can become non-existent or very blunted, very low, very hard to even identify, if you're outside of that individual. And the child becomes very confused. They don't have a strategy on how to navigate the world, how to navigate relationships, because relationships are so chaotic to them that they've never been able to get their footing and understand how to even behave in the relationship, what to expect in the relationship. So the problem here is that as children, we internalize everything, which means we believe that anything happening outside of us is our fault. We take this in and we attribute our characteristics, attributes, behaviors as the cause or main cause of these things that are happening. So we start to have these subconscious beliefs as a child that I'm a bad kid, no one gets me, it's my fault, something's wrong with me, mom and dad broke up because of me, mom's not around because I made her angry, things like this. The concern here is that these lead to problems in behavior and they also develop physical and mental health issues. Um, Expectations of adult behavior, if they've experienced childhood adversity, especially as they reach that number 4 and higher on that 10 questionnaire ACEs aware, you're going to see a higher tendency to have a lack of physical activity, a higher tendency to smoke or drink, more issues with drug abuse and drug use. And this is the alcoholism, the substance use. It's a coping mechanism because they had a hard time developing, um, you know, appropriate coping skills, and to have their guardians or parents teach them appropriate coping skills or how to regulate emotions or how to deal with emotions or express emotions. They will have harder time maintaining work, keeping jobs because they're dealing with other issues that get in the way, anxiety, substance use, just other things that can make it difficult for them to wake up and show up. Um, they're at a higher risk of obesity and developing diabetes. They're at a much higher risk for depression and suicide ideation or attempts. Higher risk of STDs due to more promiscuous behavior due to lack of concern for their own well-being and other things. I don't want to stereotype or corner this because this is more complicated than what we're looking at in a simple infogram. But they also have a higher risk of heart disease and cancer, higher risk of stroke due to the higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of risk of COPD, and they're even at higher risk of broken bones because they tend to have poor eating habits, and this means that they're not getting the nutrients that they need for their body to develop through childhood into adulthood. So you can see that the impact is pretty broad, and even in areas where people might not understand, like broken bone. Why are they at higher risk of broken bones or higher risk of STDs? Well, it's because the other behaviors that result due to this increased adversity that they experience, the collateral damage is things like STDs, broken bones, suicidal thoughts, etc. So a couple of main references here. Bowlby's attachment theory. So this is the basis for the attachment theory that we discussed if you want to look more into that. And then the TED Talk that I mentioned by Nadine Burke-Harris. That's something I suggest that you watch. It's not too long. It's very, very good. And she is actually part of the presidential board now. She was chosen by President Biden, depending on when you're watching this, but at the time that I'm speaking. So she's definitely someone who is looked at as an authority in the field. All right, so our next one is going to be coming up soon, so I hope that you'll join me. And I believe we're moving into the mind and body, which is my favorite because that's where we really get into some of the more detailed information that is very useful for those of you who may be watching just to learn more about trauma. And it's really useful, I think, to expand understanding for professionals that are in the field and to keep us caught up and current with what's going on in the trauma field. So I hope that you can join me. If you have any feedback, comments, questions, concerns, complaints, or if you noticed any discrepancies in anything that I shared, I encourage you to please reach out. You can just go to my website, www.theanxiousmammal.com, and just go to the contact page and shoot me a little note. Thank you.